it's my algorithm, but I see Shiloh and Shedeur more than I've ever seen any undrafted guy or fifth round guy on social media in the history of Instagram, Threads, Twitter, X, whatever it is. Like, those dudes are everywhere. And they caught some of Deion's strays, right? Deion had a level of greatness that was untouchable, right? Deion could say, yeah, I'm not interviewing with these people because I'm not gonna be there in the draft. Deion could say, hey, I already ran 140. I ain't effing with no more of this testing because y'all already know I'm top 5 and it ain't tripping. Watch the film, know who I am. That's the difference between, I think, Deion and who his kids were. And then I think Deion's approach to it made other people, Deion's fame, right? Deion's success, Deion's ability to one day be a head coach in the league. Also, Deion's ability and what he's done in navigating the present, right? When we talk about college of his children and now going into the pros, this was the first thing he couldn't control. And they was like,
you think you know the story behind Shedeur Sanders' draft journey? Think again. NFL analyst Ryan Clark just dropped a truth bomb that's turning heads across the league. And no, this isn't about Shedeur's throwing mechanics or how he reads the field. According to Clark, what happened during the draft wasn't just about scouting or football. It was a carefully orchestrated attack. And the target wasn't just Shedeur. It was his father, Coach Prime, Deion Sanders. For the first time in his iconic career, a man who's always been in control. From his Hall of Fame playing days to his transformation into a headline-grabbing coach, Deion found himself utterly powerless. And when Ryan Clark lays out how some folks in the NFL use Shedeur to go after Deion, it all starts to make chilling sense. You finally understand why Coach Prime looked that camera dead on and said 3 words no father ever wants to utter. It did hurt. Look, I've been covering the NFL for a long time. I've seen prospects rise, fall, get passed over. But what happened to Shedeur Sanders? This wasn't normal. This was an evaluation. It was personal. A hit job wrapped in a draft profile. Let me explain. We're talking about Deion Sanders here, the man who redefined swagger in professional sports. Back in the day, Deion could walk into a combine and say, I'm not doing your drills. You already know I'm top 5, and nobody batted an eye. That's how confident, how dominant he was. He controlled the room, the conversation, the process. But here's where it turns dark. Clark says that folks in the league, people who've been watching Deion win, watching him succeed, watching him speak his mind without apology, they've been waiting for a crack in the armor, waiting for a chance to humble him. And that opportunity came when Shedeur declared for the draft. Let's look at Shedeur's college career. The kid played for 6 different offensive coordinators. 6. And still improved every season. At Jackson State, he was lights out. Then he jumped to Power 5 competition at Colorado and kept producing, even behind an offensive line that, frankly, couldn't block a stiff breeze. But during the draft process, all that production, all that adversity overcome, none of it seemed to matter. Instead, the whispers started. Does he have character issues? Is he too confident? Is he media ready? You've heard the code. And when you add it all up, you realize this wasn't about Shedeur not being ready for the NFL. It was about punishing Deion, using his son to send a message. And if you're a parent, especially a father, you feel that gut punch. You know exactly why Deion said what he did. This wasn't just about football. This was payback.
Many things about Shedeur during the draft process were character, personality. All these things that we can't prove on the outside, right? We were able to watch.
You've probably heard the noise, the so-called reports about Shedeur Sanders wearing headphones during meetings, acting a little too cool, maybe not fully engaged. Stuff that couldn't be confirmed, but also couldn't be denied. And that, my friends, is exactly the point. Ryan Clark saw through it all. Every single one of those rumors. Nothing you could actually pin down, but nothing you could totally dismiss either. And that's not random. That's a tactic. Clark laid it out clearly. When you can't tear a player down based on tape, when the stats don't back up your criticism, what do? You start chipping away at something more fragile, his character. You float vague concerns. You let whispers swirl. Those whispers become talking points. And pretty soon, teams start treating them like red flags. But here's the real twist. The gut punch Ryan Clark delivered. This wasn't even about Shedeur. He wasn't the target. He was the collateral damage. Clark said flat out this narrative, this whole character smear. It wasn't aimed at Shedeur. It was aimed at his father, at Coach Prime. Let that sink in. They used a young man, someone's son, as a tool to get at the father, to knock Deion Sanders down a peg, to settle old scores. That's not just politics. That's not just the business of football. That's personal. And honestly, that's cold. Can you imagine being a parent, watching your child get dragged into something he didn't start just because of who you are? And the worst part, it worked. For the first time in his legendary career, a man who's always been 2 steps ahead of the game, who's controlled the spotlight, the headlines, the locker room, Deion found himself completely out of control. Powerless. That's not just a tough break. That's a tragedy in a league that's supposed to be about performance, not personal vendettas.
That make you feel when you see your colleagues or your peers going in on you, man? Like, how does that make you feel?
No idea, man. You have no idea. We've always been in front of the camera, so they know how to navigate. They know how to handle themselves.
Yeah.
And you're not gonna catch them in no foolery and no mess. You're not. When you sit up there and say something like, he went in a meeting unprepared, like, dude, Shedeur Sanders, who's had 6 different coordinators, who has still functioned and went up, leveled up every time we brought somebody new in, and you're gonna tell me
every situation.
You're gonna tell me he had on headphones.
So you a dog, your kid's a dog, and dogs gonna always rise to the top. You know what I mean? That's what I believe. You know what I mean?
It did hurt. The Bible says God uses the foolish things to confound the wise. So it was some foolish stuff that went on, but you know what? That gave them something that they need.
Let's talk about something that's been bothering me. And if you're a parent, especially a father, I think it's going to hit home. Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, has been a larger-than-life figure for decades. He was the kind of player who didn't just play the game, he changed it. This was a guy who told NFL teams how things were going to go on his terms during his playing days. He built a coaching brand out of nothing. He brought style, swagger, and success to every locker room he touched. But for the first time in his life, in his career, Deion Sanders found himself unable to protect the one thing that mattered more than anything: his son. Ryan Clark put it best. This was the one thing Deion couldn't control. And the people behind it, they knew it. They looked at Coach Prime and said, "We've got you now." After years of Deion being bulletproof, charismatic, successful, confident, there were folks in the league just waiting for a crack in the armor. And when Shedeur Sanders declared for the NFL draft, they took their shot. Not at the player, not at the prospect, but at the man who raised him. That's the heartbreaking part. Coach Prime saw it. He felt it. In an emotional interview, you could hear the pain in his voice when he said, "It did hurt. And this wasn't about money. It wasn't about a draft grade. This was about a father watching his son take hits, not on the field, but in the media, in whispers, in boardrooms. All because of him." Deion said it himself, "I can't see the next level," referring to the swirling rumors, the narratives about his son's so-called attitude. And then he said something that really stopped me cold. He admitted that some folks took shots at his kids not because of anything they did, but because they were afraid of him. Afraid of what might happen if Deion ever made the leap to the NFL as a head coach. Think about that. That's not healthy competition. That's fear. That's insecurity dressed up as analysis. And here's where it gets even worse. The betrayal didn't just come from strangers. According to Ryan Clark, one of the most painful blows came from someone Deion once considered a peer, Chris Carter, a guy from Deion's era, a Hall of Famer, someone who should have known better. Instead, he publicly questioned Shedeur, feeding right into the smear campaign. Meanwhile, other legends, Michael Irvin, Keyshawn Johnson, stood up for the kid. They praised him. They saw through the noise, the difference. They weren't threatened by Deion's success. They weren't scared of what he represents. But you know what? This whole campaign, the Whisper Network, the character digs, the locker room shade, it backfired. Ryan Clark nailed this too. He said, "I don't know if it's just my algorithm, but I see Shallow and Shedeur more than any mid to late round pick I've ever seen." And he's not wrong. The campaign to tear Shedeur down ended up giving him more visibility than most first-round quarterbacks. This kid has a stronger social media presence than guys who were picked in the top 10. And now, he's got a real shot in Cleveland. Let's be honest, Joe Flacco isn't the long-term answer. Kenny Pickett, still a question mark. This quarterback competition's going to come down to Deion Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders. And let me tell you, after what this young man has already faced, a training camp battle is nothing. What the critics missed is that they didn't break him. They built him. Every insult, every so-called red flag, every doubt about his personality, it didn't weaken him. It lit a fire under him. He's got something to prove now. And he's not just playing for himself. He's playing for his dad, for his family name, and for every young athlete who's ever been judged by anything other than what they do on the field. Ryan Clark said something that really hit home, that Deion's pain came not just from watching his son get attacked, but from the guilt, from wondering, is this happening because of me? And I can't stop it. That's a deeply human moment. That's a father's heartbreak. But you know what? That same DNA that made Deion great, that self-belief, that grit, that edge, Shedeur's got every bit of it. And now he's got something even more dangerous, a reason. 6 offensive coordinators. No protection. No excuses. Shedeur kept showing up, adjusting, improving. He sees the game faster than most kids coming out of cushy, well-protected systems. And after all the noise, all the rumors, he still got drafted. he still made it. Ryan Clark even went further. He said Shedeur's arm is underrated, that the media inflated the concerns and let the father's fame cloud the son's evaluation, and not in a good way. So here we are. Shedeur Sanders is in the NFL. Coach Prime knows exactly what went on behind the scenes. And Ryan Clark just pulled back the curtain for the world to see. This wasn't honest draft analysis. This was a coordinated takedown disguised as scouting. So now the question becomes, what happens if Shedeur starts winning in Cleveland? What happens when the character concerns fall flat? When the kid who was unprepared starts outplaying his critics? I'll tell you what happens. We get one of the most satisfying revenge arcs the league has seen in years. A young quarterback, forged in fire, now writing his own story. One that nobody can spin. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this was all a targeted hit on Coach Prime? Or am I reading too deep into it? And more importantly, is Shedeur about to make every single one of his doubters look foolish? This story isn't over. Not even close. If you want to keep following the saga and see how it plays out, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, because something tells me this revenge tour is just getting started.